And we are. Okay. So we are now down to the active learning objective. Remember, the first one is your cognitive learning objective. The next one is affective learning objective. And, you know, because affective and active are both A's, you can change that to another letter that will, you know, just help you to distinguish between the two until you feel more comfortable with it. And so I have a similar depiction here of what the learning steps are in terms of this domain, the active domain, which is knowledge and comprehension. Again, all learning tends to have the knowledge and comprehension levels to it, because when you're talking about active learning or affective learning, then people still have to understand it. And so it's good that if they don't know what it is, I say you're talking about the value of you know, accepting Jesus Christ. Well, it may be good for you to teach about who Jesus is. That's more cognitive, though you do want them to accept Jesus into their heart. That is more effective, but you want to begin with cognitive learning objectives. So the next level in the active domain is, because you're trying to get them to do something, you watch me, and then the next one is I watch you. I have two there, so don't disregard that. So you watch me, I watch you. That whenever you are teaching people, especially in gaining a skill, that you need to show them how to do that. You need to show them how to build that. You show them and then they do it. In developing a lesson plan, which is an active domain teaching, we're teaching you to teach, which is an active skill. What we have done is we've analyzed the parts of teaching, and your cognitive domain, your affective domain, now the active domain, and you have watched me build a lesson plan. I watch, you watch me. And now the next step is going to be for me to watch you. What do we mean by that? In other words, you're going to get an opportunity, just like I have built a lesson plan, and I'm teaching you that you are going to build, and you are building your own lesson plan. I don't know if it's going to be that one that you teach from, but that then you'll get a chance to teach it before an audience. You know, the audience may be just this class, or it may be the church. I'd love to see you do it before the church, but I also know that for some of you, this may be new, and you're teaching in a large group setting, one-on-many is not your forte. Well, then we'll just have you do it before the class, but that's going to be totally up to you. And so then practice. You know, if ever you want to get good at something, then there has to be some kind of assimilation, some type of practice where you can work on it so that you can get better at it. I am a decent teacher. I would hardly call myself a great teacher, but I am a decent teacher because I practice. And I look at opportunities to do it as practice. Well, the highest level, of course, is when you're doing it, when you are perfect. And I would guess, you know, if somebody is willing to bring you on their faculty, somebody is willing to ask you to do it in their church, you know, obviously there's something that you do this well about. And so, you know, because of your practice and because of your near becoming perfect, and believe you me, most of the people that we use in our universities, they're people who have been recommended, or someone saw them practicing in a place like a church setting, or in some other small group conference setting, or people who are doing conferences all over the world, and or were in the classes professors and said, you know what, hey, I think you'd make a great professor. And so that's how they may get to that perfect level. Now, what are some of the learning activities that would go along with these active domain goals? Well, of course, knowledge, we said memorization, anything where you're asking individuals to give back information like they learned it. Comprehension, again, think of dirt, define in your own words, interpret in your own words, relate or translate. These are not the only activities. I'm just saying they're good ways to remember ideas for developing your methods using your activities for teaching. You watch me, always giving a step-by-step. Again, our class on transformational teaching, what we have done basically is taught you how to develop a lesson plan so that you can teach it. But what we've done is you watch me build it and you have done it yourself in parts or in combo. In the end, after today's meeting, my expectation is that you'll be able to put a lesson plan, transformational lesson plan together in its completeness. Now, we have to practice. In other words, we can teach among ourselves, maybe even do some peer teaching before you do the teaching before the church or in group. And what we call that is assimilation or practice. It's not the real deal, but it is an opportunity for you to get better. And then perfect, well, when we have a real life commitment, to teaching, again, maybe the difference between 4 and 5, where we do peer teaching with each other. And then the last level is when you get to practice or get better teaching before your parishioners at church, which is a real life situation. So there is the active domain. So let's look at my learning description for you here so we can see where you go. So the learning objective and so forth. Whoa, let me get this off here. All right, so students will commit to an act of godly legacy leaving. How will I know? What is the activity? By writing on a card an ungodly advice behavior they're removing from their life this week. The assumption is you are teaching a class on a on a weekly basis, and so this would be for that particular learning experience, that particular learning time, where they would take on one of the principles that you taught in the affective domain that now they're going to utilize in the active domain in terms of a life change for them, an application. So my background here is basically coming from those principles. In other words, students will meditate on instances of their life where they've taken advice from an ungodly person, and what was the results? What is the methodology that I'm going to use? How am I going to teach that? What is the activity? Students will be given a card and will write one of those instances down. It could have been more than that, but it should be at least one so that they're working on that, or whatever number they're going to be working on. It shouldn't be all of them, along with scripture that addresses that behavior. In other words, that if I took some ungodly advice from an individual and I got involved, let's say we're talking about 2 young people, young male and young female, and they influence one another. They're at the age of puberty. And what they would be doing is writing down what would be the godly advice. They took ungodly advice from each other or from one of them, and it ended up in the results where they crossed the line in terms of God's boundaries. And what we would do is add scripture along with what is the one that you're going to work on. Now, this is very personal. And so what you would be saying basically is, where have I taken ungodly advice? And now, what does scripture say about how I should deal with that? And so that is my methodology. Basically, the card, ask him to write it down. And what is the evaluation? The student will commit to an act of godly legacy leaving. In other words, want to leave this for someone else so that they might know to share with another peer on how they are now going to adhere to taking godly advice. So notice after the evaluation, there is no, transitioning to the next thing, because this is the end of the teaching. And so what might be your concern at this point? Now, remember, the whole governing umbrella learning objective was about what is the results that come about from the consequences from taking ungodly advice. All right, we flushed that out in the cognitive as well as in the affective domain. Now my students have to decide, okay, what are some areas in your life where you have taken ungodly advice, and what does scripture say about that? And what do you plan on doing about that? And how is there going to be some accountability in terms of you being better in that? Because let's face it, most of us, I'm talking about you all who are taking my class today, you are better. Let us say you're better as husband and wives. You're better in your relationship with God because scripture has informed you that was bad advice that you took. I'm just using my example of the two teenagers that crossed the line. And maybe you did cross the line before you got married. And God forgives us of that, especially if we confess it. If you haven't asked him for confession, then probably you might be still carrying guilt about it. And God doesn't want a guilt relationship from us. What he wants us to do is to confess those instances of taking bad advice and now moving on to what is his advice about, about certain things. And then, what am I going to do about it? Let me give another example of this that's a little bit more closer to home in terms of advice today. There are a lot of individuals, and especially with the movement that I see that is happening, which I think is a very important movement. It is a needed movement, but there are a lot of different components to the movement, because the movement is everywhere. But I think in general, the movement is a good one. Well, what do I mean by that is many of us have taken advice about other people that have been either racist, or it's been prejudice, or it's been put down. And we've even done that with gender. And I'm especially talking about women right now. I'm not talking about transgender and, LBGQ. And the reason why I'm not is that scripturally, that is not a category of person. At least ways it's not a category of person that God recognizes as legitimate, but he does recognize that as a category of transgression, a category of sin. of which a person can reject through his power and do better. But if they continue to take advice that says, just accept what you are and what you're doing, not only are you saying that I have a right to change my identity, and of course you can change your identity. You can call yourself a woman and you're a male, or you can call yourself a male and you're a female. Yeah, you can do that, but you're also corrupting the purpose that God made you for. You can choose your identity. You cannot choose your purpose. You did not purpose yourself. You did not create yourself. And so somewhere along the line, you're going to have to reckon with that issue. You're going to have to reckon with that and say, either I line up with God and get with his purpose, or what I'm going to do is I am going to create my own purpose. And of course, that calls for people now deciding upon their own path, their own way, which is totally against scripture. So then, going back to the issue again of my students, you're my students, and let's say you ever took advice that was racially motivated, or prejudice. Well, then what you should do is should confess that to God and say, Lord, you know what? I want to agree with your word, but right now I have problems with it, and I need your help. And I need to go back to the person that perhaps I've hurt, and tell them, that, hey, I hurt you. Now, where I think that some movements are problematic for people is that they want you to take on guilt that is not your guilt. If you haven't been racist against somebody, then you don't have to go back and ask for forgiveness of that, because that's not a sin that you have carried. If you have not harmed somebody in that way, then you don't have to carry that. But I do have to be responsible for behavior that I have been involved with. I hope that you all understand me here. And I can look back at numbers of instances where I have been prejudiced, where I've even been racist against people other than Anglo people, other than white people, that I need to get the forgiveness of God, or even gender, with my wife even, that I need to get the forgiveness of God, and I need to go back to that person and to get forgiveness and say, hey, look, I'm not like that anymore. I don't live like that anymore. I don't have to go back to every woman, because I have not transgressed against every woman. And if I had, or if that was my attitude, then, obviously I can't go back to every woman, but I can go to God and ask for forgiveness and correction. Where this becomes almost nonsensical and not even logical is if we all go back to the people who have offended our mother and fathers, our grandmothers and our grandfathers. We'd go all the way back to Adam and Eve that offended God. And I already recognize that Jesus Christ has paid for that. So I don't have to carry around guilt. I don't need your guilt. And I don't think that we get anywhere by making people feel guilty. I do believe that we do get everywhere by responding to our own conviction. And where you were wrong, and especially if you see where scripture says you are wrong, that's why we study the Bible. Then what are you going to do about that? Well, in this instance, this person is going to write down on a card that instance, going to tie scripture to it, and then they're going to leave a legacy, going to let somebody else know, another peer, this is where I'm changing in this area. Okay, I want to just stop for a second because I've said a lot in that instance. And if you have any questions or any thoughts that you want to take up with me on that, then please do so. right now. I'm giving you an opportunity to talk before I go to the next item. Oh, okay. Well, I must have did a good job with results. All right. Well, we're going to move on then. And all right, let me just go back here a minute. All right. So materials needed. This should be a part of your lesson plan because you are going to need certain materials, just like you don't necessarily see it right here, but I need to have a computer. I need to have a connection internet. I need to have Zoom. What kind of space do I need? Well, I don't need a lot of space here, but you may need to know how to set up small groups using Zoom. Now, Jacob did go over that in terms of the breakout groups. If we ever need to go over that again, we certainly can do so, and I can show you how to do that. But that is basically your lesson plan. So I want to close out on this particular sharing, and I want to go to, or are there any other questions? We're still recording, and so I don't want to stop the recording to answer questions, but you can raise any questions you want to.
You had talked to me about getting more into tone, and I didn't understand exactly what tone was. Now, I don't know if you want me to bring that up now or later.
It's so fine that you bring it up now. You go back to your research questions. And in the research question where it talks about tone, it is talking about the tone of the writer, the tone of the author of that particular text, of that chapter. Like Jeremiah, is he crying? Is he mad? Is the person happy? Are they being directive? That tone is very, very important in terms of interpreting that text.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Then let me go back to my screen, and I want to get out of this. Always have a hard time getting my stuff down with this right here, but just hang on here a second. We'll get it down. Well, let me see if I can bring it up through here. I might have to get out altogether and go back in, but just hang in here just with me 1 second. All right, share screen. Oh, I know where I want to go. Let's talk about evaluation. Where's the lesson plan? Evaluation. Uh-oh. Well, okay, I didn't have it down. Let me see if I can bring this up because oh, wow. Took me a minute to get that down. I went over this other part with you on last week, and I just decided time-wise, I'm not going to go back over that, but I do want to talk with you a little bit about, teaching evaluation. There we go. Can you still see my screen? Can you see my screen? You can't see it?
No, no, okay.
All right, let's see if we can't get my screen up. Sorry for that, took a moment to get there, but. All right, can you see it now?
Yeah.
It says teacher evaluation.
Yes.
All right. So this is basically the evaluation that I'm going to be using with you. Now, again, for some of you, you're ready. Some of you, obviously, you're not. And so we're not going to rush you into your practicum. But a part of teaching, because teaching is a skill, we have to have your practice, and we have to have now you can practice before your peers, or you can practice before for the church. We can invite them to your practicum, but I'm going to let me know, excuse me, where, when you want to do that. But I do want everybody to do a practicum, and I will actually, work with you to get you ready for that and so forth if you don't feel good about it. But this is the rubric that we will use, and I'll give you a grade. It is for you. It's not going into any formal grade book for you and so forth, but it's to let you know, where you are. So basically these items, did the teacher have a lesson plan in the right format? You already know what that is. Did the teacher state a clear text idea? That's that exegetical idea or the biblical idea. Did the teacher state a clear pedagogical and andragogical idea? That's your governing learning objective. Did the teacher state a clear transition? Number 5, did the teacher state a clear revelation learning objective? That's the cognitive objective. Or what we call the CLO, cognitive learning objective. Did the teacher clearly describe how they were going to teach that? In other words, what are your activities and your methods and so forth? Did the teacher clearly demonstrate how the teacher will understand that the learners have attained the cognitive content? That is your evaluation. And so I go through that all the way through the affective responsibility, the same things, your learning objective, the methods, and then the evaluation. That's the ALO. And then I use the results. Again, I use A here too, active, but if you want to use another letter, notice down here I use SLO. And so that's just for me to let me know that I'm putting that in place of active, so it's not confused with ALO, but the same thing. Learning objective, the description, the methods, and then evaluation. Then I asked, did the teacher connect with the class? Did you feel the teacher was connected with God and his word? This is really going back to relationship. Did the teacher vary the teaching methods? Did the teacher vary the resources? Did the teacher appropriately wrap up the lesson? And then, the total points that you can earn here is 100 points. Now, what I'm going to do now, let me just see if there is something else I wanted to bring up. I will probably send you a number of things that are not associated with what we go over today, but just will help you a little bit more information on evaluation, a little bit more information on activities and so forth. But I think what I'm going to do is I want to stop my recording and just talk to you